I was halfway to my daughter's house for our weekly family dinner when my phone buzzed at a red light. It was my lawyer. 3 words on the screen froze my hands on the steering wheel. Call me immediately. In 30 years of building my company, I had never seen him use that tone. Never. Not during hostile takeovers, not during recessions, not even when a competitor tried to bleed us dry in court. I called him before the light turned green. Why, he said, skipping every courtesy. I need to warn you. Your daughter has filed a lawsuit. I laughed, because the alternative was losing control of the car. What kind of lawsuit? I asked. We disagree in board meetings. That's not a crime. There was a pause on the line. Too long. She's petitioning the court to declare you mentally incompetent, he said, so she can take control of the company. The world narrowed to sound and pressure. Rain streaked the windshield. Seattle traffic blurred into motion without meaning. My daughter. My own flesh and blood. The child I carried on my shoulders through this same city. The one I built everything for. Incompetent? I repeated. On what grounds? She claims emotional instability, poor judgment, cognitive decline following your wife's death. I pulled over without realizing it. The car stopped. My chest didn't. She's been preparing this for months, he continued. She has shareholder support, testimonies, documentation. A hearing is scheduled for next week. Next week. I stared at my reflection in the darkened side mirror. 62 years old. Founder. CEO. The man who signed every paycheck in that company. Reduced, with a few strokes of a pen, to a liability. I was going to tell her tonight, I said quietly. I was going to tell her I was planning to step back, to name her CEO within the year. Silence again. Do not confront her, my lawyer said. Not yet. You need to understand something, why? This isn't emotional. It's strategic. I ended the call and sat there, engine idling, rain drumming against the roof like a countdown. Dinner was supposed to be warm, familiar. My granddaughter showing me her drawings. My daughter smiling across the table like she always did. Instead, I now knew that smile had been practiced. I drove the rest of the way in silence. I walked into her house. I hugged her. I praised the food. I listened to her talk about work, about modern leadership, about what the company needs. And all the while, she was already sharpening the knife. That night, after I left, I didn't go home. I parked overlooking the water and sat in the dark. Something inside me shifted. Not into anger, not into panic, but into something colder, clearer. If my daughter wanted to play power games, she had made one fatal mistake. She had forgotten who taught her how to fight. I built my company the same way I built my life, slowly, methodically, and with a belief that sacrifice today would mean security tomorrow. 30 years ago, Hansen Tech was nothing more than a folding table in my garage and a second-hand desktop computer that crashed twice a day. I had mortgaged our house for $50,000 to get it off the ground. Your mother signed the papers without hesitation. She believed in me before there was anything to believe in. I worked 12-hour days as a baseline, 14 when things were bad, 18 when a contract was on the line. There were years when I didn't take a real vacation, years when weekends were just quieter work days. I told myself it was temporary, that once the company stabilized, I would slow down, that once the next milestone was reached, I would be more present. That milestone kept moving. When my daughter was 5, she used to sit on the stairs every evening waiting for me to come home. I remember seeing her there through the front door window, still wearing her pajamas, holding a stuffed rabbit with one ear missing. Some nights she was asleep before I arrived. On those nights, I would kiss her forehead gently so I wouldn't wake her, whispering promises she would never hear. "I'm doing this for you," I would tell her sleeping face. When she was 10, I missed her school play. I was negotiating a licensing deal that would keep the company alive for another year. I sent flowers instead. I convinced myself it counted. When she was 16, I missed her debate finals. I was in New York securing venture capital. I told her we would celebrate later. We didn't. By the time she graduated high school, Hansen Tech employed over 200 people. I had payrolls to meet, investors to reassure, contracts to honor. Responsibility stacked on responsibility until there was no room left for hesitation. I told myself that being a good provider mattered more than being a present father. I was wrong, but I didn't know it yet. I paid for everything: her private school tuition, her college education, no loans, no debt. I wrote checks totaling over $180,000 without blinking, because that was my job. That was how I showed love. When she wanted to intern at the company, I created a position for her as a favor, but as preparation. I wanted her to understand what she would one day inherit. By her late 20s, she was brilliant, sharp, ambitious. She spoke fluently in the language of modern business: efficiency, scalability, optimization. She sat in board meetings beside me, confident and composed, and I felt proud watching her command respect. I thought that pride was mutual. After her mother died, something in our house changed. The silence became heavier. I buried myself deeper in work because work was familiar and grief was not. I didn't realize I was teaching my daughter a dangerous lesson, that emotional distance was strength. Elena tried to warn me before she passed. "She needs you more than the company," she said one night, her voice already weak. "She thinks you don't love her." I dismissed it gently. I told her she was wrong, that our daughter was strong, independent, that she understood sacrifice. What she understood was absence. Over time, I began noticing small shifts. My daughter stopped asking for my opinion, unless it involved strategy. Conversations turned transactional. She spoke about the company like a puzzle to be solved, not a living system of people. She questioned decisions that weren't purely profit-driven. Employee retention programs, community partnerships, the foundation I maintained in Elena's name. "These don't generate measurable ROI," she said once, not unkindly, just clinically. I defended those choices. I believed that loyalty mattered, that culture mattered, that long-term stability was worth more than quarterly spikes. We argued, but I thought it was healthy tension between generations. I didn't see the resentment growing underneath. What I failed to understand was this: while I believed I was building a future for her, she believed she had grown up competing with a company she could never defeat. Every missed dinner became evidence. Every late-night call became confirmation. Every board meeting where I spoke longer than she did became another mark against me. And when she finally decided to act, she didn't act like a daughter. She acted like an executive. By the time I realized how much I had sacrificed and how poorly I had explained why, it was already too late. The foundation I had built was strong. The family connection beneath it was not. And that weakness was exactly where she chose to strike. The change didn't happen overnight. That was the most dangerous part of it. If my daughter had suddenly turned cold, suddenly challenged me, suddenly acted like an adversary, I might have noticed. I might have stopped it early. But resentment doesn't announce itself. It grows quietly, feeding on small moments, missed chances, words left unsaid. At first, it looked like ambition. She started arriving at board meetings earlier than everyone else. She came prepared with slides, projections, efficiency models. I was proud of that. I encouraged it. I told people, she's sharp. She's going to take this company further than I ever did. What I didn't see was how she watched me while I spoke, not with admiration anymore, but with calculation. She began documenting meetings. That alone wasn't unusual, but she did it differently than before. Every pause, every raised voice, every moment of disagreement was carefully noted, time-stamped, categorized. When I pushed back on aggressive cost-cutting proposals, she didn't argue emotionally. She nodded, smiled, wrote something down. Once, after a particularly long discussion about employee automation, she said casually, "You seem stressed lately, Dad. Are you sleeping enough?" It sounded like concern. It felt like concern. It wasn't. She started using new language, words like emotional attachment, legacy bias, cognitive rigidity. Phrases lifted straight from leadership psychology articles. When I defended our long-term clients, she called it sentiment over strategy. When I refused to slash benefits, she labeled it fear-based decision-making. Each time, I brushed it off. I told myself she was young, that this was generational friction, that eventually she would understand what it meant to carry responsibility for hundreds of families, not just a balance sheet. At home, the distance widened. Our weekly dinners continued, but the tone changed. She asked fewer personal questions. Conversations drifted back to work, even when I tried to steer them away. She would glance at her phone during my stories, nodding politely, already elsewhere. I noticed she stopped laughing the way she used to. Her husband became quieter around me too. Nervous, overly polite. The kind of politeness people use when they're hiding something. When I asked him about his projects, he answered vaguely, eyes flicking toward my daughter as if checking for approval. I felt it, then a subtle shift in power. She corrected me in front of others, not aggressively, just enough to undermine. Actually, Dad, the numbers suggest a different approach. She framed it as clarification, but the message was clear. The old man was slipping. I remember one meeting in particular. We were discussing a partnership proposal that promised fast growth, but came with heavy layoffs. I rejected it outright. Not angrily, firmly. "We don't grow by hollowing ourselves out," I said. "We grow by earning loyalty." She leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, studying me like a case file. "Sometimes," she replied calmly, "leaders confuse personal values with corporate responsibility." The room went quiet. No one challenged her. No one supported me either. After that meeting, she sent a follow-up email summarizing the discussion. Neutral tone, objective language. But the way it was written subtly framed my position as emotionally driven resistance. I didn't confront her. I should have. Instead, I rationalized it. I told myself she was testing her authority, that this was how successors learned. I told myself that trust meant giving her space. What I didn't realize was that she wasn't learning from me anymore. She was studying me. At home, late at night, I began replaying conversations in my head, wondering if I had raised my voice too much, if I had sounded defensive, If grief had softened my edges in ways I couldn't see. That doubt was the most corrosive thing of all. Because once doubt creeps in, you start editing yourself. You hesitate. You second guess. You let things slide that you shouldn't. She noticed, and she used it. By the time I felt the ground shifting beneath my feet, the foundation had already cracked. The respect I assumed was there had been quietly replaced by something colder. Preparation. The official notice arrived 3 days later, not by phone, not by conversation, not even by a warning, by courier. A thick envelope placed neatly on my desk by my assistant, her hands trembling slightly as she said, "Legal documents, Mr. Hansen." I knew before I opened it. The first page confirmed everything my lawyer had told me. My daughter was formally requesting the court to declare me mentally incompetent to manage Hansen Tech. The language was cold, precise, clinical. It stripped away 30 years of work and reduced my life to a list of alleged deficiencies: emotional volatility, cognitive inflexibility, declining judgment following spousal loss. They were using Elena. They were using the worst moment of my life as a legal weapon. I sat there for a long time, reading the words again and again, not because I didn't understand them, but because I couldn't accept who had written them. My daughter's name appeared on every page, signed, verified, supported by sworn statements. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was an execution. The documentation was extensive. Transcripts from board meetings where my tone was described as agitated. Emails I had sent late at night framed as evidence of poor emotional regulation. Strategic decisions twisted into proof that I was attached to outdated practices. The most painful part wasn't the accusations. It was the care with which they had been assembled. This wasn't anger. This wasn't impulse. This was planning. 6 months at least. 6 months of smiling at family dinners. 6 months of calling me Dad while preparing to remove me. 6 months of pretending to learn from me while documenting my every move. I stood and walked to the window. Seattle stretched out below, gray and indifferent. This city had watched me build something from nothing. It had watched my marriage, my losses, my victories. And now it was about to watch my daughter try to bury me. My lawyer arrived within the hour. He laid out the situation without sugarcoating it. "If the judge grants temporary control," he said, "you'll be removed pending evaluation. Even if you're cleared later, the damage will be done. The board can vote you out while you're sidelined." "So she wins," I said. "She thinks she already has." That was the moment something in me went still. Not numb, not broken, focused. Up until then, I had been reacting, processing, mourning the illusion of the family I thought I had. But sitting there, looking at those documents, I understood something with absolute clarity. My daughter had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. She hadn't confronted me. She hadn't challenged my decisions openly. She hadn't asked for control. She had tried to erase me. I thought of all the times I had defended her to the board, all the doors I had opened, all the trust I had handed her without conditions, and she had repaid it by questioning my sanity. That night, I went home alone. I didn't turn on the lights. I sat in my study with Elena's photograph on the desk, her eyes calm, steady, knowing. "You warned me," I said quietly. The betrayal wasn't just professional. It wasn't just legal. It was personal in the most final way possible. From that moment on, I stopped thinking like a father. I started thinking like a man who had been targeted. And I knew one thing for certain. If my daughter wanted to make me her enemy, she was about to learn exactly how dangerous that choice was. The morning after the papers arrived, I didn't sleep. Not because I was panicking, but because my mind was finally clear. For the first time in months, everything made sense. The subtle shifts, the documentation, the carefully chosen words, the way my daughter had stopped arguing and started observing. I hadn't been losing control. I had been studied. At 8 sharp, I was sitting across from my lawyer in his office, a place that smelled like old leather and certainty. He didn't waste time. "She's built a narrative," he said, spreading documents across the table. "And narratives are powerful, but they're only dangerous when they're uncontested." I nodded. "Then we contest it." He looked at me carefully. "This isn't about proving you're sane. That's easy. This is about exposing intent." That word stayed with me. Intent. Because accidents don't last 6 months. Accidents don't involve coordinated shareholder meetings, psychological framing, and pre-selected expert witnesses. What my daughter had done required discipline. It required planning, and that meant it could be traced. My first call was to Steve. Steve Wilson had been with me since the first year, back when Hanson Tech still fit in a garage, and optimism was our primary currency. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't ambitious for power. He believed in systems, people, and long-term thinking. He answered on the second ring. "I need you," I said, "not as an executive, as a witness." He didn't hesitate. "I was waiting for you to call." That told me everything. Within hours, we were sitting in his office, documents spread out like pieces of a puzzle, finally willing to be assembled. He had been watching too, quietly, carefully. "She's been holding private meetings," he said, "not illegal, but strategic, promising growth numbers that don't match reality." He slid over a printed email chain. My daughter's language was polished, persuasive, and deeply misleading. High dividend increases, rapid automation savings, lean operational future, fantasy numbers, and fantasy promises. That afternoon, my lawyer brought in a forensic accountant, not because we needed to prove fraud yet, but because we needed to know where to look. "People who move this fast," the accountant said, "always cut corners somewhere." We didn't have to wait long. The first irregular transfer showed up before dinner. Corporate funds moved without board approval. Not huge amounts at first, just enough to cover consulting fees, legal retainers, strategic advisors, all paid for with my company's money. By the end of the week, the total crossed 7 figures, and suddenly the story changed. This wasn't a daughter trying to protect a company. This was an executive abusing access. That night, alone in my study, I realized something else. My daughter hadn't just underestimated my resolve. She had underestimated my restraint. If I had confronted her immediately, if I had exploded, accused, demanded explanations, she would have adjusted, covered tracks, changed strategy. But I hadn't. I stayed silent. And silence, when paired with patience, is devastating. By the following Monday, we had allies, board members who felt uneasy but hadn't known why, employees who had been promised raises that made no mathematical sense, a compliance officer who had noticed anomalies but hadn't connected them yet. They all started talking, not because I asked them to, but because truth has momentum when it finally starts moving. My lawyer leaned back in his chair one evening, satisfied for the first time since this began. She wanted you on defense, he said, explaining yourself, apologizing, justifying your existence. I smiled slightly. And now? Now, he replied, she's the one who needs to explain. That was my awakening, not to anger, not to revenge, but to reality. I could still be her father, but only if I survived being her opponent first. I didn't announce my counterattack. I didn't threaten. I didn't warn. I didn't even change my routine in ways anyone could notice. That was the trap. Every morning I arrived at the office on time. I attended meetings. I spoke calmly. I let my daughter believe that her narrative was working, that I was tired, distracted, overwhelmed by the pressure she had engineered. She mistook my restraint for weakness. Behind the scenes, everything was moving. The forensic accountant worked quietly, buried in transaction logs and authorization trails. Every dollar my daughter had moved left a fingerprint. Dates, IP addresses, approval gaps, patterns that told a story no courtroom performance could erase. By midweek, the numbers were undeniable. Corporate funds had been redirected to legal retainers, consultant fees, strategy firms hired without board approval, all justified internally as preparatory operational costs. Preparatory for what? A coup. Meanwhile, my lawyer focused on her other blind spot, confidence. People who believe they're winning stop checking their footing. She had promised the board a future that looked brilliant on slides, but collapsed under basic arithmetic. Automation savings that assumed zero friction. Workforce reductions without accounting for severance, retraining, or litigation. Growth projections built on perfect conditions that never exist outside theory. Employees started coming forward on their own, not out of loyalty to me, but out of confusion. They'd been promised salary increases that contradicted budget forecasts, equity options that didn't exist, promotions tied to restructuring plans that hadn't been approved. One engineer said it plainly during a private meeting. Either she's lying, he said, or she doesn't understand the math. Both were dangerous. The most valuable information came last. Her lawyer. She had chosen well, or so she thought. A woman known for turning family disputes into public victories. Aggressive, charismatic, ruthless, but also careless. Security footage from a shared office space captured something she never expected to matter. Conversations she assumed were private. Coaching sessions disguised as preparation. She told my daughter what to say, how to say it, when to pause, when to show emotion. That wasn't legal strategy. That was witness manipulation. When my lawyer played the audio for me, I felt no satisfaction, no triumph, only certainty. The trap was set, and still I said nothing. At family dinners, I listened. I smiled when appropriate. I praised my granddaughter's drawings. I thanked my daughter for the food. She watched me carefully, searching for cracks. She didn't see any, because I wasn't cracking. I was waiting. By the time the next hearing approached, my daughter was more confident than ever. She walked through the office like someone already in control. She spoke to department heads as if decisions were already hers to make. She even corrected me publicly once with a softness that bordered on pity. "Let's not overwhelm you with the technical details, Dad," she said, smiling. I nodded. Let her believe it. The silent trap only works when the other side keeps moving forward. And she was walking straight into it. Confidence changes people. It straightens their posture. It sharpens their voice. It convinces them that consequences belong to other people. My daughter was confident now. She moved through the office like someone already crowned. Doors opened faster. Conversation stopped when she passed. People adjusted their tone around her, not because they respected her authority, but because they sensed where the wind was blowing. She made sure I saw it. In meetings, she spoke first. When I responded, she nodded slowly, the way doctors do when listening to patients who talk too long. "Well, revisit that later," she'd say. "Let's focus on forward momentum." Forward momentum, her favorite phrase. She hosted private lunches with board members. I wasn't invited. She didn't bother hiding it. There was no need anymore. In her mind, the vote was already decided. The court was just a formality. I overheard her once in the hallway, speaking to a department head. "Change is uncomfortable," she said calmly, "but comfort is what killed companies like this." Like this. As if Hansen Tech were already a corpse. At home, her tone changed too. She spoke to me carefully, gently, like a nurse managing a difficult patient. She asked if I was resting enough, if I remembered to eat, if the stress was getting to me. I recognized the strategy immediately. Plant the idea, reinforce it gently, let others draw their own conclusions. At one family dinner, she smiled across the table and said, "Dad, you don't need to worry about work anymore. I'll take care of things. Soon." Soon. She said it like a promise, or a warning. I said nothing. She mistook that silence for surrender. The board meeting before the next hearing was the worst. She arrived with a full presentation titled Hansen Tech, the Next Era. My name didn't appear on a single slide. She spoke confidently about automation, about restructuring, about streamlining legacy positions. She didn't use the word layoffs, but everyone in the room heard it. When I challenged her projections, she smiled. "These numbers can feel overwhelming," she said, "especially if you're used to older models." The room shifted uncomfortably. I could feel eyes on me, measuring, judging. That was the moment I understood the depth of her arrogance. She believed she had already won. She believed the company belonged to her by right, that my years of leadership were an obstacle to be cleared away, that loyalty was an inefficiency. After the meeting, she stopped me near the elevators. "Don't take this personally," she said softly. "This is just business. Just business." That was the lie she told herself to sleep at night. What she didn't realize was that her confidence had made her careless. She spoke too freely, promised too much, left trails behind her because she believed no one would ever check. She was no longer hiding. She was celebrating early. And in every war, that's when the losing side makes its final mistake. The courtroom felt different that morning. Not louder, not more crowded. Heavier. People weren't whispering out of curiosity anymore. They were whispering because they sensed a shift, the kind that happens right before gravity takes over. My daughter sat at the plaintiff's table beside her lawyer, posture straight, expression composed. She wore confidence like armor. To anyone watching, she looked exactly like what she had been selling for months. A calm, capable leader protecting a company from a declining founder. She didn't look at me. That was fine. I didn't need her attention anymore. The judge entered. Formalities followed. Then my lawyer stood. "Your Honor," he said evenly, "the defense would like to present new evidence relevant to the plaintiff's claim of competency and intent." Her lawyer objected immediately. "This is a delay tactic." The judge raised a hand. "Overruled. Proceed." The first document appeared on the screen. A bank transfer. Then another. Then another. Dates, amounts, account numbers, corporate funds moved without board approval. My daughter's head turned slightly. Just enough. "This evidence," my lawyer continued, "shows a pattern of unauthorized transfers totaling $847,000. The number landed like a dropped plate. $847,000. A murmur rippled through the room. "These funds," he said, "were used to pay legal retainers, consulting firms, and strategic advisors hired exclusively to support the plaintiff's legal action against the defendant." Her lawyer stood abruptly. "Objection! Mischaracterization!" My lawyer didn't flinch. "We have invoices." They appeared on the screen. Firm names, dates, matching amounts. Silence. The judge leaned forward. "Miss Hanson," he said slowly, "were these expenditures approved by the board?" My daughter's lawyer spoke for her. "They were preparatory operational costs." "Preparatory for what?" the judge asked. No answer came quickly enough. My lawyer continued. "In addition to financial irregularities, we submit evidence of witness coaching." That did it. Her lawyer froze. Audio played through the courtroom speakers. Clear, calm, unmistakable. "You need to emphasize emotional instability. Pause after mentioning his wife's death. Don't say angry. Say volatile." Her lawyer's voice. Coaching testimony. The judge's expression hardened. My daughter finally looked at me, not with anger, with shock. She hadn't known this part was coming. The judge called a brief recess. In the hallway, reporters were already whispering. Board members avoided eye contact. The confidence that had surrounded her that morning evaporated into something brittle. When court resumed, the tone had changed. This was no longer about my competence. It was about hers. And for the first time since this began, she wasn't in control of the narrative. The collapse didn't come with shouting. It came with silence. When the judge reconvened the session, the room felt smaller, tighter, as if the walls themselves were leaning in to listen. The confidence my daughter had worn like armor that morning was gone. In its place sat something fragile, uncertain, human. The judge spoke slowly, deliberately. "Given the evidence presented," he said, "this court has serious concerns regarding the plaintiff's conduct, financial integrity, and legal strategy." My daughter's lawyer tried to recover. She stood, voice controlled but strained, arguing that the transfers were misunderstandings, that the recordings were taken out of context, that none of this negated the original concern about my leadership. But the momentum was gone. Facts have weight, and once they start falling, they crush everything beneath them. The judge dismissed the petition to declare me incompetent. Just like that. No flourish, no drama. Dismissed. The word echoed in my chest, but it didn't bring relief. What followed mattered more. The judge ordered an independent investigation into the unauthorized transfers. He referred the matter of witness coaching to the Bar Association. He warned the board that any attempt to remove me based on this petition would be viewed as retaliatory. My daughter stared straight ahead, unmoving. Her allies were already retreating. I watched it happen in real time. One board member avoided her eyes. Another checked his phone, probably responding to messages he hadn't expected to send so soon. A third quietly gathered his papers and left without a word. She had built her campaign on certainty. The moment that certainty cracked, no one wanted to be standing next to her. Outside the courtroom, reporters swarmed, but not around her, around me. "How does it feel to be vindicated?" one asked. I didn't answer. Vindication felt like a shallow word when it meant watching your own child unravel. My daughter approached me near the elevators. Up close, she looked smaller, younger, tired in a way no executive training prepares you for. "Dad," she said quietly, "I didn't think it would go this far." I met her eyes. "That's the problem," I said. "You thought." She flinched. "I thought I was doing the right thing," she said, "for the company." "No," I replied calmly, "you were doing it for control." She shook her head, tears threatening but not falling. "You never trusted me." "I trusted you without limits," I said. "That's why this hurt." Her mouth opened, then closed. There was nothing left to argue, no leverage, no narrative to lean on. She had tried to remove me as a liability. Instead, she had exposed herself. The board meeting the following day was brief. There was no vote, no grand speeches, just quiet acknowledgments that mistakes had been made and that leadership would remain unchanged. My daughter didn't attend. By the end of the week, her consulting contracts were terminated. Her influence dissolved. The people who had once praised her vision now spoke of miscalculations and overreach. She went from future CEO to cautionary tale in under 10 days. At home, I sat alone one evening and considered what victory actually meant. The company was safe, my name was cleared, my authority restored. And yet, the house felt emptier than it ever had. Because justice had been served, but it had cost me something no court could restore. A father isn't supposed to win against his daughter. But sometimes losing would destroy everything you built. The silence after victory is different. It doesn't cheer. It doesn't celebrate. It asks questions you can't avoid anymore. For days after the ruling, I kept expecting my phone to ring. An apology, an explanation, something. But my daughter stayed quiet. Pride has a way of doing that. It keeps people distant long after the battle is lost. I returned to work slowly, not because I was tired, but because I needed to see my company with clear eyes again. Employees greeted me differently now, with relief, with respect sharpened by fear of what almost happened. They had watched a family war unfold at the top of the organization. They had learned something from it. So had I. One evening, I received a message from my daughter. "Can we talk? Just us." We met by the water, where the city feels quieter and the past doesn't press in so hard. She looked stripped of armor, no tailored suit, no executive language, just a woman who had gambled everything and lost. "I thought if I took control," she said softly, "you would finally see me as an equal." I looked at her for a long moment. "I never needed you to defeat me to prove your worth," I said. "I needed you to stand beside me." She cried then, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to let the truth breathe. We didn't erase what happened. We didn't pretend it never occurred. That kind of forgiveness is cheap and dangerous. Instead, we rebuilt with conditions. She returned to the company, but not as my replacement, as my partner. Shared authority, clear boundaries, transparency written into every decision, power earned daily, not assumed. The board agreed unanimously. Stability mattered now more than ambition. At home, things changed too. Family dinners returned, but without phones, without business talk, without hidden agendas. My granddaughter climbed into my lap again, asking for stories instead of sensing tension she couldn't name. One night she asked, "Grandpa, why were you sad before?" I smiled gently. "Because I forgot something important." "What?" "That being strong doesn't mean being distant." That lesson had cost me more than money, more than reputation. It had nearly cost me my family. But it also gave me something lasting. Perspective. Legacy isn't control. It isn't dominance. It isn't winning at all cost. Legacy is what survives after power is shared, not hoarded. My daughter learned that ambition without restraint becomes entitlement. I learned that kindness without boundaries is weakness. Together, we learned that respect, real respect, has consequences when it's broken, and power when it's restored properly. And that is a lesson worth passing on.